Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we are broadcasting today. I'm broadcasting from the lands of the Widjabul-Waibal people of the Bundjalung Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and to their storytelling traditions. We extend our respect to First Nations people participating in the webinar today or watching the recording following today's webinar. Today's Law Week webinar is Scams and the Law. Good afternoon, my name is Bridget Barker and I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. Today's webinar will be an hour in total, including some time for Q&A at the end. After the webinar, you will receive an evaluation survey and we really appreciate any feedback you'd like to share with us. You'll also receive an email with information about some of the resources we refer to in the webinar today. There is a handout which will be uploaded into the chat and you can download it from there. If you're in a library today, you might have access to a paper copy of the handout as well. Today's webinar is for the public and we also welcome any community workers, legal assistance sector colleagues and libraries joining us today. We hope you all learn something new and interesting for yourselves, your families or people that you support. So just to let you know what we aim to cover today, we're going to look at what a scam is, some case studies of current scams and what you can look out for. Also, how to protect yourself from scams and how to protect your privacy. I'll introduce you to our panel members for the discussion today. I'd like to welcome Carleen McConnell from New South Wales Fair Trading, Zoe Tischler from HBL Ebsworth, and Finn Hipkin from Legal Aid New South Wales Consumer Law Team. Welcome everybody. Would you please let the audience know a little bit about the work that each of you do in your particular services? Carleen, perhaps we'll start with you.
Yes, I'm in the community and industry engagement team with Fair Trading, and we like to educate people on the consumer rights and all the laws that fair trading about. And yes, so just trying to keep people safe and keep minimising harms in the consumer rights area.
Thanks, Carleen. Welcome, Zoe.
Hi everyone, my name's Zoe Tischler. I'm a Senior Associate in HWL Ebsworth Cyber Incident Response Team. So we help a lot of entities respond to cyber incidents. That includes helping them notify individuals and relevant government regulators and authorities. And I also generally advise on privacy, data protection and cybersecurity issues.
Thanks, Zoe, and welcome, Finn.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. My name's Finn Hipkin. I'm a senior solicitor here at Legal Aid New South Wales. I work in the consumer law team, so we give advice to consumers throughout New South Wales on a range of consumer rights issues. So things like contracts, insurance, credit and debt issues, problems with goods and services, and of course, scams. So looking forward to getting into it today. Thanks, Bridget.
Thank you. So we'll start with a question for you, Carleen. Firstly, for our audience, what is a scam?
Thanks, Bridget. A scam is a way of tricking people into handing over money or personal details. Scams constantly change as scammers take advantage of new technology, new products and services, and local events or crisis. Scammers are getting smarter and anyone can be a victim of scams. So it's not just the vulnerable, they can target anyone. Scams have three parts: the approach, the communication and payment. Scammers deliver you a story which is usually reasonable to believe and pretend to be something they are not, as in a government department or a bank. They will approach you online using either social media, email, dating sites or online shopping, by phone or at your front door. They'll use a convincing story use and your personal details to convince you that they are genuine. They'll contact you regularly and play with your emotions. Great opportunity, excitement about your win, guilt if you don't help someone out. They might ask you about a payment in an unusual way. Example, using gift cards, virtual currency, or direct bank transfers, or transfer from a post office using virtual currency such as Bitcoin. So there's lots of ways that they can trick you into these cons.
Thanks, Carleen. Now we're going to move to our first case study. And some of you may have heard this case study in the news. Yaz, if we could have the next slide shared with our audience, thank you. Finn, would you read out for people?
Sure. Let me read it out. So this is a real life scam that that happened recently to Doris, who started working when she was 15 years old. She saved to buy a house on her own after a divorce. Last year, Doris, a 75-year-old, saw an international bank offering what she thought was a good return on deposits. So she decided to transfer her life savings of $260,000 across to help secure her retirement. She felt great about the decision because she thought with the interest she'd earn, she'd be set up for life. She thought she wouldn't have to work again and would be able to live comfortably from her invested savings. She unfortunately realized she'd been scammed when she needed to make a withdrawal from what she thought was the account several weeks later. Scammers had held out that they were from a Singapore-based bank, DBS, and had tricked her into transferring her life savings to them. She said that they made it sound so perfect and I lost a lot. And she then went on to make a complaint to the ombudsman, but was unsuccessful. So ended up losing her life savings in this particular scam.
Yeah, it's a very tragic situation. So Finn, Doris fell victim to an investment scam. How do investment scams work and how common are they?
They're really common, Bridget. So Australians lose more money to investment scams than any other. There's a statistic that was quite alarming. I read that Australians lost $158 million to investment scams between January and May of last year, which was an increase of 314% compared to the same period in 2021. They generally involve promises of big payouts, quick money, or guaranteed returns. So we should always be suspicious of an investment opportunity that promises high returns with little or no risk. The old maxim, if it seems too good to be true, then it probably is, really does apply to these kinds of scams. They can be hard to spot, and it's not a case of a consumer being gullible as much as it is the scammers becoming very sophisticated and clever. So before investigating, always seek independent legal advice or financial advice from a financial advisor. And the best way to do that is to jump onto the ASIC, Australian Securities Investments Commission website, our corporate regulator, and just check that the financial advisor you approach is registered on that website. In terms of the kinds of warning signs to look out for with investment scams, I've already mentioned the promise of low risks with high returns. Another trademark is that people are sort of contacted out of the blue. So you're sort of contacted in an unsolicited manner, either by phone call, email, or message on social media from someone offering advice on investments. Always be cautious around that kind of contact. Another warning sign is high pressure tactics. So you're contacted repeatedly by the same person. You're told you need to act quickly or invest quickly or you'll miss out. Be careful of that kind of approach. Cryptocurrency investment scams is a sort of big niche area at the moment, and can give rise to scams because of the lack of regulation in that area. Crypto scams are often sort of peddled on social media through forums like Discord and Telegraph. And they'll show, fake data and charts and graphs and things like that. And then you'll find out that you've actually lost all your money when you go to withdraw it. Some other warning signs: someone you've not met in person offers you investment advice, use of celebrity endorsements or images that are almost always fake, and then promotional materials on websites, and if documents like prospectuses, which usually come along with a with an investment, are not registered with ASIC, the Australian Securities Investments Commission, then it may well be part of a scam. And another warning sign is where you're asked to deposit funds into different accounts for each transaction. Scammers may claim that this is for security reasons or because they're an international company. So not every investment scam is the same, but there's some common warning signs that we would suggest you look out for. Over to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Finn. That's all great information to share with our audience today. But of course, in Zoe, in this situation, Doris thought she was investing her money with a different bank. What could she have done to protect herself in this situation?
Thank you, Bridget. So a good idea when contacted kind of out of the blue with these kind of requests is to do your own independent research. For example, it's easy to do an internet search of the bank or company and call an officially listed number and confirm with them that the communication you've received is legitimate. You can also just check what products the bank is offering on the official website and make sure that that lines up with the communication or the offer that you've received. Before parting with your money, you can also do your own research on the investment company, and you can do that by checking out moneysmart.gov.au to see if they have an Australian financial services license. And you can ask yourself a good common sense question is, if a stranger knew the secret to making money, why would they share it? If it sounds too good to be true, oftentimes it normally is. I would say as well here, kind of what Doris can do after the fact. Doris might like to contact her own bank to see what they can do to stop the transaction. That didn't seem possible in this case, but sometimes if you contact them early enough, also Doris might be able to obtain a credit report or report a credit ban, and that can be obtained for free by a few different service providers.
Thank you, Zoe. Colleen, Zoe raised the issue about Doris's own bank. Does Doris's bank owe her any obligation to check with her about a money transfer of such a large sum before the money is transferred? And I guess another question I have for you is, once the money has been transferred, can you ever get it back?
Yeah, unfortunately, Bridget, Australian laws, we don't have those laws in place about large transfers and the limit on transfers. Sometimes your own bank can put limits on the amount of money that you can transfer, but that's not a law as such. So the only thing that she can do is check with the bank, as Zoe said, immediately after, if she thinks that something's not right, check with the bank to see if they can stop the transfer. If you're using a credit card, banks can do a great deal, but when you're transferring your own money, unfortunately, there's not a lot the banks can do. Although the banks have fraud teams, they can do lots of checks and balances and try and get the money back. But what a lot of these scammers do is, once that money has been transferred and received, they will take the money and shut the bank account down. So it's often hard for the bank to recover the money. So unfortunately, as Zoe said, you should do all your checks and balances before you do the transfer. Check on ASIC's website to see whether the company or the organisation is legitimate. And yeah, because it's often hard to recover the money, especially if it's an overseas company. So,
and I guess, as Zoe said, those independent checks, going to don't use a link that you might receive or have seen. Check the bank's independent official site. Yes, yeah, it's very tragic.
Very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Finn, what about banks in other jurisdictions? Are there different levels of protection offered in other countries? There's been a bit of media about this in recent weeks, hasn't there?
It's a bit of a hot topic at the moment. And I mean, look, as Carleen correctly pointed out, it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to get your money back in Australia once it's been transferred to a scammer, particularly when the banks are involved. There is a code in Australia called the e-payments code that offers some limited protection for consumers where the banks are found to have done the wrong thing. I stress that they are very limited protections and include things like, for example, having not having a reasonable daily limit, for example. But even then, if a consumer is not very protective of their password and gives it out to a scammer, then the consumer can be found in breach of that same code. At the end of the day, very few complaints to the ombudsman about the conduct of banks actually result in consumers getting their money back once it's been transferred. Other countries, as you mentioned, do have different approaches. There's a lot of talk in the media at the moment about the approach that the UK has adopted, where there's a voluntary code that's adopted by the majority of banks over there, where there's a principle that blameless scam victims will generally be reimbursed regardless of whether the transaction was authorized or not. So regardless of whether the consumer themselves actually click the button to transfer the money to the scammer, or whether a scammer somehow accessed the person's account and transferred it without them knowing about it. So a lot of the time in the UK, people do get their money back unless there's been some sort of gross negligence, or of course, if the consumer was involved in the scam themselves. The UK also has a sort of rules around payee confirmation. So in Australia, where you make a transfer using online banking, you put in the name of the recipient, BSB, and the account number, but it doesn't necessarily matter if the name doesn't match up with the BSB and account number. Whereas in the UK, it's a different situation, and consumers will get a warning if those details don't match up. Something to look out for was an announcement this morning, actually, around the establishment of a national anti-scam centre in Australia that's going to develop new industry codes about the responsibilities of banks and other financial institutions around responding to scams. It's a bit unclear what they're going to be just yet, but that's something that's going to be happening in the next few months. There's going to be a collaborative approach between agencies to tackle scams, and I understand there's going to be a sort of white list of authorized phone numbers to prevent people from being scammed, where people purporting to be banks call you up on a random number and say, give me your password. So there are a few changes happening in Australia in terms of the code and the rules, but it's not quite the level of the UK. So things are different in other jurisdictions.
Thank you, Finn. Given the huge amounts of money that Australians lose to scammers every year, it seems that it would be helpful to Australians if there could be some changes made to the protections that are offered to people more broadly. We'll move on to our next case study now. Thank you. Carleen, would you read out
Sure.
Eli's case study for our audience, please?
Yes, Eli had a mobile telephone account with Optus. After the Optus data breach, Eli received a text message on his phone that appeared to be from Optus. The text told him Optus were issuing a new SIM card to phone customers. The text message asked Eli to click on a link to book the delivery of the new SIM card securely. Eli had been quite shaken by the data breach and clicked on the link without thinking. Eli downloaded some software to track the delivery of his SIM card. This allowed malware to be installed on his phone. The next time Eli used his phone to do mobile banking, the scammers were able to access his account information, and Eli lost $10,000 savings from his account.
Thanks, Carleen. Zoe, we hear a lot about data breaches recently in the news. There was the Optus data breach and I think Medibank data breach. What is a data breach?
Thanks, Bridget. So a data breach is when data is inadvertently shared or maliciously accessed by an unauthorized person or a third party. So this can either be by accident or because of a security breach. So individuals, small businesses and large organizations and government are all at risk of data breaches, and a breach can affect anyone who's provided personal information or anyone who's collected and stored it.
Okay, so yes, I mean, often you forget how much personal information you might have provided to an organisation, don't you? In Eli's situation, what could he have done to protect himself?
So Eli, in response to this particular situation, should just generally, when he knows he's experienced a data breach through Optus, well, Optus has experienced the breach and he's been impacted by it. It's always important to be on the lookout for scammers. So this involves being really wary of suspicious emails, phone calls, or text messages that purport to be, in this case, from Optus or from any organisation you trust. So that might include your financial institution, government, or other response agencies that might seek to contact you in the event that there is a data breach. Anywhere where you're requested to click on a link or provide your own personal or credential information, or where you're requested to provide remote access to your device, that should always raise a red flag, and you should go and again, similar to the other case study, if you go and contact known details of that agency or of that institution to confirm that that communication is legitimate. You can have a look. In this case, you could visit Optus's website or other companies that have had a data breach and see what they're actually telling customers who are impacted by that to do and the steps they recommend they take. So for example, here, whether or not Optus was actually recommending or providing replacement of SIM cards, that information would be there on their website. Delete these suspicious messages once you've determined they're a scam or you're suspicious of them. And you can also do other things like just contacting, for example, ACCC Scam Watch to see if there's communication up there about existing scams in relation to, say, for example, these kind of data breaches.
Unfortunately, Australians are not only subject to the frightening reality of having their data taken and shared who knows where, but then they're constantly approached by different scammers who just seem to flourish in these situations, unfortunately. Carleen, there's an organisation called ID Care. What is ID Care?
Yes, Bridget, ID Care provides advice on how to respond to data breaches, scams, identity theft, and cybersecurity concerns. And they have a dedicated support page. They have dedicated support pages to assist Optus and Medibank private customers that have been impacted by the data breach. While there are real and serious risks, there are ways to protect ourselves. So you should be contacting ID Care on 1800 595 160 if you have any concerns.
Thank you. Zoe, in the online environment, what can people do to protect their privacy?
So there's a few different things you can do, and some of them kind of overlap with what I was mentioning before, but it's good to familiarize yourself with common scams. For example, you can regularly review ScamWatch resources for information about current scams to watch out for. Don't click on any links that you're not expecting or communications from unknown organizations. Install antivirus and those kind of software on your computer. Enable multi-factor authentication wherever possible. Use strong passwords on all your online accounts. And you can constantly have a look at the further resources that are being produced for what you can do following a scam or top tips to prevent scams. That information is available on the OAIC website, which is the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. ScamWatch has a lot of really good resources as well, and so does the Australian Cyber Security Centre, ACSC, just for top tips that are constantly being updated about common scams and how you can be vigilant and protect yourself from that.
Thanks, Zoe. You mentioned multi-factor authentication. Would you mind explaining what that is in case some people in our audience aren't sure?
Yeah, sure. So multi-factor authentication, it's a kind of core component of protecting access to different services you might use. So it's a method that requires 2 or more proofs, I guess, of your identity before you access a service or a particular website. So for example, you might have your username and password, but then you might have a prompt for a code to be sent to your phone, and then you enter that code into that website to enable you access. So it basically is a way of checking your identity. And it means that if your information's been impacted in a data breach or someone else has gotten access to part of your credentials, someone might have gained access to your password without access to, say, for example, your mobile phone, they might not be able to get in and kind of do unauthorized things using your information. So it just adds another layer of protection to your personal information that makes it harder for third parties to use it in an unauthorized way.
Thank you. That's great. We've had some questions that were received when people registered for today's webinar, so I might move to those now. We had a question from Anna, and her question is, what responsibilities do I have to keep my credit card and bank details from unauthorized use?
I'm happy to jump in. Look, it'll depend. All our answers will depend on the facts of a particular case, but there are provisions in the e-payments code that impose a responsibility on consumers to protect things like passwords, and if a scammer gets access to a password, for example, that is not securely stored, or if you give your password to someone over the telephone, thinking that it's an employee of a bank, but in fact it's a scammer, then that can, in some circumstances, mean that the bank's done all that it can, and you as a consumer have a responsibility to bear the loss.
Okay, thank you. We had another question from Christina. It might just be a matter of us giving some practical suggestions. What to do with all these scam calls? I get multiple in a week. I think we all experience that. Zoe or Colleen, do either of you have any suggestions?
Unfortunately, there's not a lot that you can do. A lot of these scammers, they just call random numbers, like they might be targeting the orange area, so they might call 633 22 10, and then they'll just randomly call the next lot of numbers. So whether you've got yourself listed on the do not call register or not, they will just call the next 1290, 1291, 1292. So it's very difficult not to be targeted. So they will just call random numbers in a sequence. So yeah, it's very hard not to be called. I guess the best idea is, if you don't recognize the number, or if you pick up the call and there's a pause, just hang up.
And you mentioned, Colleen, sorry, Zoe. I was just going to say, Colleen, you mentioned the do not call register. I think that's still a good starting point. You're right. It won't avoid all of the kinds of scam calls that you'll get, but it will help with some of them.
That's right.
I get the calls from different countries on a weekly basis, and I'm just in the habit of clicking decline.
Decline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for anyone who doesn't know, the do not call register, that's managed by the Australian Communications and Media Authority, and you can register for that online. But otherwise, completely agree with what Colleen and Finn have said. And if you're receiving multiple calls from the same number, block it. And again, reiterating some of the messages we've said before, don't click on links, don't give personal details or any financial information if you do kind of end up on those calls.
And just for information, the do not call register doesn't include charities, so it doesn't stop them from calling you.
I think another, I'll just jump in with one final point, Bridget, if that's okay. The other thing that scammers tend to do increasingly is sort of play off the people's emotions. There's a scam going around at the moment where the scammer will pose as a sort of son or daughter of someone. So there'll be a text message that says, "Mum, I've run out of money. Can you try? But I've lost my phone. Can you transfer money to this account?" Or things like that. So be aware of that happening, and speak to friends and family and loved ones about scams and about what you're hearing about, because the more people speak, the more people are aware of these scams that just take so many different forms. It's often impossible to keep up with them.
And there was a new scam released last week, the day after the budget was handed out on Wednesday, you were getting a text message saying, "We're from Services Australia. You're eligible for a $750 one-off payment. So click on the link." So they're very quick to come out with these scams the day after the budget was released. Yeah,
I think yes, and if you're caught at a moment where you might be a little bit distracted, it's very easy to just go ahead and click, isn't it, when you receive those kind of messages? We had a question from Jean as well. How do we make the banks more accountable in protecting their clients? We have sort of had a bit of a discussion about this so far.
I think that's something that the government need to look at. Unless a law's been passed, I think it really needs to be scrutinised. But yeah, unless something has been passed by law, there's not a lot that we can do. Yeah, I'm not sure, Finn, whether you've got any other information.
Yeah, I mean, the announcement of the National Anti-Scam Centre looks to be encouraging. At the moment, the responsibilities of the bank, I mean, they do have responsibilities to do certain things to prevent scams and to manage your money in the right way, but it's quite unclear in the law and in the codes what those responsibilities and duties are. It would be nice to see those obligations better articulated, and I do note that there was some commentary this morning that the government's going to look to perhaps establish some clearer codes in that regard. Whether it will go as far as the UK remains to be seen, but a lot of consumer groups are calling for greater protections through, as you say, Colleen, through the passing of laws and codes to protect consumers.
Yes, I guess that's correct. And another thing that people can do is speak to their own local representative, their local MP. Go and speak to them about your concerns and the fact that you'd like that there be greater protection for consumers. We can all play a role there. Thank you. Megan also had a question along the same lines, responsibility of Australian banks to protect and cover consumers where scams impact their financial assets compared with the UK. So obviously Megan's been listening to the same news that we all have. Alice had a question. Sorry, Finn.
Oh, sorry, but I was just going to mention as well that, I mean, there are avenues where you consider that the bank has done the wrong thing in one way or another when it comes to a scam. There are avenues to sort of seek redress, that they are limited. And one of the avenues is to make a complaint to the bank itself. And then if you're unsuccessful in resolving the issue there, to make a complaint to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, or AFCA. And that's an ombudsman. It's a free service for consumers, and it can make decisions on, amongst other things, whether a bank has complied with its obligations with respect to a scam. But as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to get up on an argument that the bank's done the wrong thing, particularly where you have inadvertently given out a password, or where you've yourself transferred money to a foreign bank account thinking that it was someone else. But that is an avenue that people can explore to hold banks accountable.
Yes, that's right. And I think, Carleen, you mentioned another case study that you'd heard about where there was a young couple that had a housing deposit.
Yeah, there was a story on, I think it was a current affair some weeks ago, where a young couple had a savings of something like $97,000. And, you know, we're all encouraged to go online these days and do our apply for loans and things like that online. And they had thought that they were applying for a loan with a bank, and they'd inadvertently transferred $97,000 to a company or to a scammer, and lost their $97,000, thinking that they were applying for a bank loan, a home loan. So that was devastating for that young couple that had saved madly for, you know, many, many years.
Yes.
I might add to that. We've seen similar examples where, you know, a real estate agent might have suffered a data breach, and there's been real emails from that real estate agent to a potential home buyer asking for transfer of a deposit. And it's not actually the real estate agent, it's a fraudster who's gotten in and is using that email address. Just another important tip: when you're transferring large sums of money, even where it is someone you've spoken to previously, you should always call your known contact at that organization and verbally validate account details. And again, using contact details that you're able to verify just before transferring that kind of large fund. That's any large funds. That's another kind of best practice thing to do as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Carleen and Zoe. Yes, we had another slide I wouldn't mind sharing with the audience that just had some useful information, including the ID Care website. Thank you. We've had an audience member just asking to check the correct website for address for ID Care. So these are a couple of things that we've mentioned during today's webinar. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission's Little Black Book of Scams that has some really helpful information about scams and how to protect yourself from them. And you can subscribe to the Scam Watch service to receive email alerts about new scams. So that's another way that you can protect yourself, is by subscribing to that alert so that you are aware of new scams that Scam Watch have found out about. And so then if you get a call and it sounds like one of the latest scams, then you know you're a little bit ahead of the game and you can protect yourself that way. We've had a comment from an audience member saying that they did a Google search for Samsung Help, and they were asked for payment, and it started out as a refundable $2 amount, but then quickly increased, so they backed out. So that was quick thinking on that part. We've had a question from an audience member. Is there any system in place to protect older persons or elderly people from scams? I'm not aware of anything for particular parts of the population. Finn?
I'm not aware of anything in terms of prevention, but there are a lot of really good resources, some of which you've already mentioned, Bridget, available online that are directed to older people who do tend to be specifically targeted when it comes to scams. I'm just having a bit of a look at Scam Watch, which is a fantastic resource that a few of us have already mentioned on the ACCC's website, and there's a particular section there containing advice for older Australians. So I'd encourage people to have a look there to get hold of that little black book of scams, and of course just to talk to each other, talk to friends and family, and just to sort of be aware of the kind of tricks that scammers can use to target older Australians.
And I guess education is the best way to be awareness. I talk about scams all the time. I've got an 81-year-old mother, and she calls me, every night saying, I was targeted 3 times today. I got these calls, and she said, I just hang up now. And I said, good mum, that's what you need to do. So being aware that they're out there, and just don't respond to anything that looks suspicious, and don't respond to anything that you don't recognise as being a family member or a friend.
Yes, absolutely. We've just had a kind of a comment from someone in the audience, but this is another area where people are sharing their data, and that's when you're looking for a place to rent. There's a lot of online sites estate agents use to collect data from people applying to become a tenant of a property. And yeah, I guess in that case, it might be good to perhaps also verify with the agency by telephone, and also to check what data protection methods that they have, and if you don't become a tenant of a property that agency is managing, what do they do with the information you provided them if you don't end up becoming a tenant? So I don't know if any of you have anything else to suggest in that situation.
I think as well, just always being conscious of when you are inputting your information into those kind of sites, that you do take the time to kind of read through the privacy policy, or what that particular organization says that it will do with your personal information, and just make sure you're across that before you sign up to it. Although in a lot of cases, there's not a lot of choice about going back to them and saying, I don't consent to XYZ, but at least then you're across of where your information's going.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. It's very easy to share information without taking the time to read those privacy policies, which can be quite dense reading, that's for sure. We've had another question from our audience. Is it safe to give credit card details over the phone and online when donating to a charity?
It's a tricky one. I think the answer is it depends. We are often asked to do that kind of thing. I suppose there's always an inherent risk involved in providing credit card details on the phone. As we've spoken about today, there's always a chance that the person on the other end of the phone is not actually who they say they are. And I think that's probably particularly the case when you receive an unsolicited phone call from someone purporting to be a charity. I'm sure there's a section on Scam Watch around scams involving
Charities.
Scams involving to be charities. So I think the answer is it depends. That there's always a risk, and I think some of the tools that we've spoken about today, doing your own research, if you get an unsolicited phone call from someone asking for money and you're not sure if they are who they say they are, then hang up and do some research online and find an official number, all those kinds of things. That may not have answered the question very well.
I guess it's about not feeling pressured to donate immediately. You can say, well, I'd like to think about this, and then you can do your independent research and find a different method of donating to a charity without having to respond to a call. And I think that's what scammers are very good at, isn't it? They're very good at applying pressure to people and to people's emotions, playing on people's generosity when it comes to charities.
And you can also call the organisation, as you said, Bridget, just say, I don't want to donate at this time, I want to do my own research. And you can call the organisation and say, are you doing a charity drive in a certain area? and they may say, no, we've not got callers going out to certain areas. So that's one way to check as well.
Yes, thank you, Carleen. There's a question, is there any further developments happening in this area to minimise the information required on online forms? Zoe, you mentioned to me before the webinar started today about some extra money in the budget for the Office of the Australian Information Privacy Commissioner.
Yeah, so we're looking at the OIIC is receiving more funding to increase its regulatory capability in responding to these very kind of issues. In particular, the OIIC has pointed out a real focus on organisations only retaining information that is necessary for the purpose that they collect it, and kind of not retaining or collecting information that goes beyond that. And we've seen that in some of these recent examples, for example Optus, the Latitude breach, those kind of ones where information might be collected legitimately. For example, you need to verify your identity at points in time, but then there's questions about how much information is needed and then how long that entity needs to retain that information. So it's definitely an issue that's received a lot of attention in recent times. And I think we're going to see a lot more guidance from regulators and the OAIC in helping organisations to make sure they really limit the collection of personal information to really what is necessary and reasonable for them to provide the services that they are to individuals. So I think it's a bit of a watch this space, but it's definitely something that's front of mind for both regulators and organisations in responding to these kind of increasing data breaches and cyber threats.
Thanks, Zoe. There's been a few people asking about how to get access to the links and information that we've referred to. I should have mentioned earlier, everybody, you will receive an email a day after the webinar, as long as you've registered for the webinar, and I'll provide all those links and any resources that we've referred to during the webinar today in that email, so you will get that information, and don't feel like you have to copy everything down while the webinar's happening today. There's a question, I don't know if any of you have a response to this, about what should you do if your email is hacked and you end up involved in a scam, in that your email is used to send scams on to somebody else?
I think jump in, change your password, set up MFA, those kind of things. But also you should let your contacts know, just as a heads up, to say, I think my email's been compromised. If you've received a communication from me, it's not legitimate, just to stop then other people kind of falling victim to the same thing. But then securing your own account with some of those measures we've talked about today.
And ID Care is the other organisation we've spoken a little bit about. I think that would fall within something that they could give some advice on. But yeah, I agree, Zoe, all those points.
Yeah, I think ID Care can help you come up with sort of a plan of attack once there's been a breach of your data. What steps to take to start to reclaim your identity information back. We've had another question. Is there any watch on particular organisations such as recruitment agencies on the collection of personal information? This is a question from a participant at St Mary's Library. So it's great to have our libraries and patrons in the libraries joining us for the webinar today. I guess, as Zoe said, the regulators are starting to be, the federal regulator is going to be better funded to assist people in relation to keeping an eye on these situations. And I suppose it's, as we've already stated, about asking the questions or looking at the privacy policy of the particular recruitment agency, and checking how they will protect the information that you share with them, and for how long they might keep that information. Does anybody else have anything to add there?
You're also entitled to request that an organisation delete your personal information, or you're entitled to requesting access to a copy of information that a particular organisation might hold about you, and there's normally contact details for a privacy officer or that kind of thing on those organisations' websites where you can ask those questions or raise those queries. And if you are concerned about any particular entity's actions, it's always best to kind of contact them in the first instance to try and resolve concerns you may have. And if that fails and you can't reach a resolution, you can contact the OAIC as well. There's various entities that are required to comply with the Australian privacy principles, which includes things about not retaining information longer than necessary, all of those kind of things. But in the first instance, it's always best to reach out to the entity itself with your concerns and see if you can reach a resolution with them.
Thank you, Zoe. We've had another question from the audience. When would you involve the police in a hacking experience?
You can make if you've been experienced kind of any kind of cybercrime, the Australian Cyber Security Centre has a report cyber function that acts as a kind of centralised reporting channel that goes through to the relevant, if it's police or other kind of agencies where they can investigate that. But the other thing that gives you is the equivalent of a police report number, which sometimes you need to provide to your financial institution if you're trying to get protections put on your account and additional security. You might need to show that you've made a police report, and you can do that through that report cyber function through the Australian Cyber Security Centre or the ACSC. Thanks,
Zoe. The ACSC, I'm learning lots of new things today.
Sorry, there's so many acronyms in this space too.
Yeah, so yes, just to reassure our audience that we will be sharing all this information in the email that you receive after today's webinar. And an audience member, Nicola, has also mentioned that she heard about the National Anti-Scam Centre opening in July and sitting within the ACCC. So yes, it's good news for people in that we've heard about today. So it's all helpful and going to help people. And I suppose, as you said, Carleen, that you play an educational role in relation to scams. And I know, Finn, that's why you participate in these webinars that we run a few times a year about scams. The best protection we can have is if we all share information with each other and alert each other to the latest scams that we've heard about, and just to not be fast to click on links that we receive, and to pause for a moment and think about it and take our time to double check things. I guess we're also pressured with time, and we tend to act quickly, often in a hurry, but it's those times when we probably most need to protect ourselves. We've had a question about GoFundMe requests. How people should respond to those sorts of requests.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think the answer would be, again, with caution. Not to take away from the fact that GoFundMe does serves a very useful purpose, and the vast majority of GoFundMe campaigns would are not scams. I'd imagine that there'd be a small minority of people who take advantage of the platform to try and get money out of people. So we've spoken before about doing your research, making your own inquiries, finding the legitimate phone numbers and websites of people and organizations if in doubt. But it's a good question, and it just sort of goes to show the diversity of ways of which you can have your money taken from you. Not sure if anyone else had anything to add there.
No, that's right. And you know, given the number of sort of natural disasters that we've experienced in Australia and locally, I live in Lismore, so here in Lismore we've had floods, and there've been so many GoFundMe accounts sort of set up to help people, local people who had lost everything in floods and fires and situations like that. So it is a common thing that we all see and respond to. So I guess, yes, being cautious and finding another way to double check is probably the best advice there. Yaz, I wonder if we could share the final slide where we tell people about the other webinars that they can watch during Law Week this week. So just to let you know, tomorrow we'll be running a webinar about renting and the law in our Lunch and the Law series. That's Tuesday. On Wednesday, there'll be a webinar about traffic fines, driving and the law. We're going to have panels for all of these webinars, so there'll be a bit of a Q&A situation happening. On Thursday, employment and the law, with a bit of a focus on discrimination and I think harassment in the workplace. And Friday's webinar is debt and the law. So lots of information we're trying to share with the public and our community workers who've subscribed to these webinars, and to our libraries across the state who are joining us during the webinars this week. So we'd encourage you to register for those, even if you don't think you can attend, but you'd like the information, because if you register, you will receive a link to where you can locate the recording following the webinar. And we will share with you the link for the recording of today's webinar. And I'll also share the information, all the different acronyms and useful websites and places where you can find information to protect yourself. I'd like to say a really big thank you to our panel today. Thank you, Zoe, Carleen and Finn. It's great that you've been able to share your expertise and knowledge with our audience today.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Bridget.
Thank you.
So also, sorry, just to let you know that the handout has been uploaded into the chat. So if anybody would like to download that handout, they can access it now. We're getting lots of thanks from people, and thanking the panel for sharing the information. So we'll close the webinar now, everybody. Thanks for attending, and we look forward and hope that some of you might be able to join us during the week for our other webinars. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thank
Thanks for attending,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.